Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Guys.
Amy's going to be a few minutes late, so I'll get us started here in just a couple minutes. We'll give everyone an opportunity to log on, and then we'll go ahead and kick off right on time. I know it's been a busy day for everyone.
Great.
Oh, and there she is. Super.
I made it, Shannon.
You did. I was just saying we're going to start right at 6, and Amy's going to jump
I was
up
racing.
if she can.
I was going to leave right after the task force, but I'm like, oh my God, I have so much to do. So I stayed and then raced home.
No problem.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hello.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
You too. All right.
I know Ellen's going to be a few minutes late, so we won't wait on that. She sent a message that she will be here just a little behind.
Okay.
Started.
And Adam, Victoria is going to need to be able to
She's here.
share her
She's
screen.
here.
Yeah, she's just going to need to be able to share her screen. So, and Shannon, you're good for the presentation, right?
To show the draft, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
No problem.
All right. Give it a couple of minutes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. So I'll call the meeting to order at 6:01. And first up is approval of the meeting minutes. We had two separate minutes to approve. The first one is for 9/17, and I'll take a motion on those minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve those.
Thank you, Victoria. First, is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Stephanie. All right, any discussion? No, all those in favor can just raise your hand. I can see everybody. Great, motion passes. And the next set of minutes was for 9/30/2020, so I'll take a motion for those as well. I saw Pim first. And is there a second? Christine, do you want a second? Great. Any discussion on those? All those in favor? Great. And I also saw that Danae posted the previous revised minutes as well for anyone who wanted to have those for your records. All right, so we'll jump right in with subcommittee report out. And I don't see Roger yet, so we'll switch it up. Victoria, do you mind going first with Sauhegan 2.0?
Not at all.
Great.
Not at all.
So I think Adam's going to provide you screen sharing ability.
It looks like I should be good. So let's.
Great. I see a few folks joining. You haven't missed anything. We just approved the minutes. So hopefully you didn't have any issues with them.
All right. Does that look how it should for everybody? It looks like Sohegan 2.0 subcommittee report.
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. Okay, so I am going to give this report. Our subcommittee has posted this report for the last week. So all of you have had a chance to see it. I haven't had any questions. So I assume that a lot of it is self-explanatory, but we'll do questions at the end when we get there. So the timeline, for those of you who are on this meeting, you already know kind of where the timeline is, but this is a refresher. So we have been at this since December of 2017, when the Sohegan board decided to bring forth $150,000 A&E fee warrant article to figure out how we can fix up our building. And I want to happily remind people that our Sohegan board and our finance committee were voting in favor of this, as were our citizens in March of 2018. And then we've gotten ourselves to this point now where we're realizing that all of our facilities across the SAU need some attention, and we want to make sure that we're creating a good balance for our residents. So we are working all together. And over the summer, that's when this subcommittee kind of really took the reins on Sohegan 2.0 to figure out what needs to be done. The Sohegan School District hired LaValle Brenzinger as the architect to come up with a comprehensive building plan for the Sohegan campus. Much like we're doing with Clark Wilkins and AMS right now, they have already done that with the former principal Scully and our superintendent, along with students, to come up with a plan before. The plan that they came up with is a $35.5 million project proposal. And the whole purpose of our subcommittee was to take that proposal and really dig down deep and figure out what the priorities are and how the Sohegan Cooperative School Board can make some decisions about what to do next. So this is the $35 million project. There are 10 projects within 10, scopes within this project. This is a probable cost sheet. So if you look over on the right, you can see those numbers. The information that we had in all of Sohegan 2.0 is on Slack if anybody is interested in looking at that report and if you haven't seen it already. So as a subcommittee, we decided that there were 3 objectives that we needed to achieve. We had to find consensus on priorities. We had to establish the HVAC needs, and we had to keep in mind that costs needed to be controlled across the SAU. Our priorities came out that we were most concerned in the beginning about HVAC system, and then the science labs in the annex, the secure main entrance, and the locker rooms. I don't think any of those should come as a surprise to anyone. They're all things that have been on the school board's radar at meetings and around town. Our committee process, we spoke with stakeholders. We spoke with our superintendent, our principal, director of facilities, our architect, and our construction. So HVAC began as the thing that we thought we were going to tell you that you needed to spend money on. What ended up happening was slightly far from that. I want to read through these because I want to make sure that I get the information correct. But since March of 2020, our director of facilities has identified current HVAC repairs to extend the life of the current system, and that includes air filtration. He's also identified current repairs to unit ventilators that will extend the life and improve air circulation. And he has created a maintenance plan to properly maintain those units. If we were going to do a complete overhaul of HVAC, the probable cost document puts it at $22.5 million. After speaking with our director of facilities and our superintendent, we feel like the improvements that they've done to this point are sufficient, and any further spending would need to be something that the Sohegan School Board and the administration would work together to decide if they need to do that and when they need to do that. At this point, there is life left in those units, according to them. Somebody who knows more about HVAC than me. Second up are our science labs in the annex. We know that there's inadequate space there. So
Victoria, do you
Yep.
mind if I just interrupt? Can you go just back to the previous slide?
Yep.
And can you or Roger or Adam just touch on the work that would be required in order to complete the HVAC work and why that cost is so high and
Yep. So the cost is that high, I'm sure, for a variety of reasons. Part of the reason is that when you are going to get to the HVAC ductwork and completely redo it, you're going to take everything that's between the ceiling and the floor above it. You're going to take everything down. So you're going to have to redo your lights, your fire suppression, your ceiling tiles, your electrical, and then you get to your HVAC ductwork. So all of those things would need to be replaced. So once they got into the scope of it and started looking at it deeper, that all of that would need to be replaced. Is there anything, Roger? Is Roger on here yet? Or Adam or Lance?
Yep.
Any of you that would like to chime in about that?
No, I think you did a good job with that, Victoria. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amy, does that answer it for you?
yeah,
Over.
just making the point that it's a larger scale project. It's not just the HVAC, it's all of these other elements that we would want to do as part of 2.0. But it doesn't make any sense to do them separate from the HVAC because you're just going to have to do it twice really. So it doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
So yeah, great. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
Nope, I don't mind. So the science labs in the annex, Superintendent Steele has labeled them as the #1 curricular need at Sohegan. The probable cost document puts them at just over $1 million. This is something that our subcommittee does recommend, installing the labs in the annex, but we do think that the cost can be lowered. There's a few ways to lower it by doing a design and build, by not replacing soft costs like furniture and things that can be reused, and analyzing the amount of labs that are needed. So securing the main entrance is point number 3. And this is something that Community Council has really focused on during their safety analysis. And while we understand that securing the whole campus is an option, and it is included in the greater 2.0, this concept of securing the main entrance is at a smaller cost. So the probable cost document for this is $716,000. Again, the subcommittee recommends securing the main entrance, but it has to be at a level that the board feels is attainable. There are different ways of doing this at different costs. So that will be something that the board will need to make their decision about. There's an option to redesign the interior space, which will come at a higher price tag than changing, adding an additional door or changing a key-in system. And the locker rooms are in a state of disrepair, as the pictures were shared around our community last year. We know that there are poor conditions that need to be addressed. So the probable cost document is just over $1 million, or a little over $1 million for this. That quote includes, or that cost includes, also creating some additional spaces. So the subcommittee is recommending to repair the locker rooms without creating additional spaces, which would be able to lower that cost that you see.
So Victoria, I'm sorry, just to clarify on that locker room improvement, that number that you have there, that does or does not include the additional spaces?
It does include additional.
It does. Okay. And can you define it all? And what does additional space mean in a locker room? Just like
Yeah. So
wider.
Yep. So there are team rooms, and there are some moving some walls so that there's better sight lines that are included in this. It's addressing both the upstairs and the downstairs space in that area.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. So this brings us over to our total cost. This is the total cost based on the probable cost document from LaValle Brenzinger. The subcommittee believes that these 3 things should be focused on, should be the priorities for the board to spend. Of course, it's the charge of the Sohegan Co-op board, what you decide to spend your money on. and the limit of money that you decide to focus on any projects. So then the other thing that we were tasked with was to tell you how you should get this money and how we're going to make this happen for Sohegan. So the first is to use the unassigned fund balance at the end of fiscal year 21. This allows work to begin in this coming summer, but it does require frugal spending by the Sohegan Co-op School District in the current year. Second option is to include a warrant article on the ballot to move the unassigned fund balance into a capital improvement fund. And this will allow the improvements to be worked on over time. And finally, an option is to include a warrant article on the ballot to fund a capital improvement fund to add funds to each year in order to save towards future projects while keeping the tax rate steady. These are 3 suggestions that our subcommittee came up with while we were working with our different stakeholders. And then when it comes to future projects, I think it's worth noting that all of 2.0 is worth looking into. These were just the priorities that we were able to figure out needed to be addressed first. Also, the desired number of science classrooms in the main building needs to be determined. This fall, with a new principal and some changes in scheduling, it's not really the time to figure that out quite yet. That will be another step. And then obviously any changes that happen should have the SAU 39 strategic vision in mind. And that brings us to the end. So I am happy to take questions. If I can't answer your question, there's lots of people on here who I know can. I'll keep my screen up for now in case anybody has a question.
Thanks, Victoria. Yeah, before we get to questions, I want to thank you for your leadership and your entire subcommittee for all of this work. I know it's been a ton, and it's exciting that we have been finally been able to dive into 2.0 and really start to make sense of it and start to make some of these projects a reality. So really appreciate all your work and the great suggestions. And I know that the Sohegan board will be very grateful for this work as well.
Thank you.
So I did see Tom Gauthier's hand up.
I just had a question in terms of the costs on this. Those are 2019 dollars, correct? So do we anticipate that there will be a hike by the time we get to it next year, so that instead of 2.9 million, it's going to be 3.5 or 3.6? And that may be a better question for Lance, Victoria, as opposed to you, not to put you on the spot for it.
Nope, that's okay. Lance, can you speak to that?
Sure. We carried all costs for next year for 21 and 22. The escalation factor is in all these projects. If
Okay.
it on 22, we would have to see what the market conditions are. Right now, the current market conditions are that 21 will be down a few percent, and that 22 will be back up 5%. So we are assuming within that time frame we're going to be good.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions or comments?
Pim waving, and Jeannie, I think, had her.
All
hand.
right, yeah, I'm just trying to go back to full screen. Go ahead, Pim. Was that you first?
Yeah, thank you.
Right, go ahead.
So I'm going to echo the stuff that Amy said at the beginning. Thank you very much for all of the hard work on this. I think it's great. It warms my heart to see that almost $5 million is not necessarily required at the moment. So I think that's a good start. But obviously there are costs that will be required for maintenance. Do we have, and I don't know, Victoria, if you're the one who has the answer, or if it's Roger or somebody else that would have an estimate of what the costs are to get us to, keep the current HVAC system, in good condition for the next however many years we can extend the life for. So that's part A question, and I'm going to just follow that up quickly with my part B question, which is, so in all of the other recommendations, science lab, the securing the main entrance and the locker room improvements, the committee recommended that there are ways to reduce the costs by a couple of different avenues in each one. Do you have an idea of what those reduced costs might look like? So we have an overall, obviously the 2.9 million for the balance of those projects is a high estimate, I would imagine. What does it look like given those other reductions that you identified?
Sure. So I'll answer question B. And the answer to you is no, we don't know yet. Without having direction from Sohegan board to really pursue that, that's not something that our subcommittee has done at this time. Something that we can do. We have all the communication lines open to be able to do that. It would just be a question of what wants to be included. And that's more detailed than where we were at. And then for the first part of your question, I'm going to pitch it over to Roger to be able to speak to our HVAC system.
So it's definitely a great question on what costs are going to be associated in the years to come. And for me, it's really anticipated costs. We know that we brought forward to the board that at this time we had $73,000 worth of unit ventilator repairs in the main buildings that were identified. I do not see that cost is going to be that extent in the years to come, but we're certainly going to have breakdown on these units. They're mechanical units. We have actuator valves, we have motors that run them, and we have dampers that open and close. And with mechanical systems, they're going to have failures. So in the operating budget for Sohegan for this year is we do include HVAC repairs that are accounted for as they were in the past, And we're also picking up just a preventative maintenance program, or it's proposed in that as far as getting a third-party vendor in here for preventative maintenance on all of these units throughout the years. So it is identified in the budget for HVAC line items. I don't have them in front of me right now for specifics, but we are accounting for just anticipated repairs in the years to come.
Okay, great. Thank you both for those answers. I think, Roger, that was going to be my follow-up question, was whether or not we're going to account for those costs in the budget. It sounds like you are. So it's good. I look forward to hearing more about those when we hear more about our facilities subcommittee budget meeting. So thank you.
Yeah, so Pam, I think the idea is that perhaps we should be putting this on our agenda for a Sohegan board meeting so that we can dive into it and have a further discussion on where the board wants to go as far as giving more direction to the subcommittee.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, so I know we have a meeting Monday. I'm not sure if it's too late to get on that agenda or if we need to wait till the next meeting. So I'll leave that up to you.
Yep. Yeah, I was just reviewing it earlier, so I'll see if there's an opportunity, and I'll get with Adam if there is.
Great. Let's see, Jeannie, question?
Yes. I first of all want to thank Victoria. Excellent summary of the work that we did. I also want to sort of assure Pim and everybody else on the board that we asked pretty much the question that you asked, Pim, regarding the maintenance of the HVAC system and how long we could sort of limp along with what we have. It seems like Roger's leadership has improved the system greatly, so that we feel pretty confident that the air quality has been improved and ventilation has been improved, and that that it's a safe place for our kids and staff to be if they're in person. So that was important to us, just to evaluate where we were in the HVAC system. We also probably, I think, we're pleased that Roger had made sure that the maintenance was included in the operating budget, because we thought that was pretty essential. And there was a question that I saw come up in the chat about how much is in our building maintenance fund. And I would be curious to know what that number is, because we may have to, or you all may have to, dip into that at some point, and it probably would be useful to know that number.
Last I knew, it was about 250, but we'd have to check with Michelle on the exact number on where we are right now. But that was the last that I had heard from an inquiry.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions? All right, so it sounds like next steps are to coordinate with the Sauhegan board to get all this information to them and have further discussions at the board level, and potentially giving direction back to the subcommittee to continue their work and come back. That sound about right, my fellow Sauhegan board members, Stephanie and Pam?
I think that sounds good, Amy.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you again to the subcommittee. All right, next up is the report out from the all-important building scope subcommittee, chaired by Roger. So I'll turn it over to you. And is Lance on? Yeah, there he is. Great. So Lance may need to be supporting you as well in your report out.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Yep.
So our subcommittee was actually able to meet a couple of times since our last meeting. We had one meeting concentrated on Wilkins School that tied a little bit over to the second meeting. In the second meeting, we concentrated on middle school. And what we did as a subcommittee is we really took Lance's and Harvey's documents and we kind of went through them line by line. Anything that really stood out to us, we asked a question on it and they were able to provide good feedback. We also looked at the materials that they were using, and for some instances, we were able to change them to just have different types of materials. Some items we were able to look at and we just felt that it was appropriate to remove it at the time. And we did both of that really for Wilkins and middle school. So Wilkins School, before we started that task, we started at 73.5 million. And after going through that exercise, we were able to bring it down to $66 million. For Amherst Middle School, we started at 42.2 million and we were able to bring that down to 31.6 million. We really selected just the materials and what was going into the building. There are other options at this time that we didn't go through for the committee. Just for instance, we didn't talk about project management at all. We didn't bring those items up. We as an owner, we have just line items for Wilkins School, for instance. We have $250,000 for an owner's project manager. We have $180,000 accounted for commissioning. And we also have $50,000 in there for testing. Again, like I mentioned, we didn't go through those items as far as removing them, but as far as looking at these documents, we still have a second pass at this if we felt that we could go through here. Just looking at the OPM, $250,000. If we as a board wanted to actually just reduce that, maybe it's looking at maybe this OPM is anticipated as a 40-hour a week. Having a director of facilities on board actually that is engaged with the project. Sometimes people in my positions, they are part of the project, they are not part of the project. With me on board and being engaged, maybe we can look at this number and maybe we're looking at a 20-hour OPM. Those are just examples of where we can look into this a little bit deeper. Also, another example is just kitchen equipment for Wilkins. We're accounting for $450,000 of kitchen equipment. I reached out to our nutritional services director, John Lash. There really isn't anything in the Wilkins school that could be transferred over to the new school. So we dove a little bit deeper and we've reached out to other nutritional directors in the area. Recently from the past district I was at, 2 years ago, we paid about $150,000 for a full kitchen at the new Golden Brook Elementary School in Wyndham. Not saying that this 450 should be 150, and just saying that there are areas here for a little bit of just adjustments, I would say. And although we were able to remove some items that we remove, we actually have to pick up other items to just account for that. And an example of that is the discussion with the subcommittee is we discussed the skylights. This came up at our last meeting here. And we found that our vestibule that is proposed, it's a very nice design, has a lot of light coming in. It was proposed for above and surrounding, we looked at that as we thought that it was a good idea to remove the skylight from the vestibule. So although we may have removed a $649,000 skylight, we still need to infill that space with structural steel, roofing, and other materials like that. So although we're trying to reduce, some reductions also account for additional adds to those projects as well. So really our task, we were really just looking at the materials Lance and Harvey were proposing and seeing where we could adjust that to just have more of a design that really fits our needs with our feedback as well. For those two meetings, we also invited Anna and Bethany that were both present to that so that they could offer their feedback as well. And if you ask me, we had two very, very good meetings. Anybody that was at those meetings, please chime in or Lance chime in on anything that I've missed here.
No, I think it's an excellent summary. I agree. They're very productive meetings. I think the group was focused on making sure we still have a quality building for a quality education. It was changing materials that we aren't going to regret in the short term or in the long term. I would also note that on the soft cost side, because I'm sure it's going to come up, we continue to carry about 5% of escalation. Again, that should be adequate for 21, 22. We would need to reassess, obviously, if the board says they're going to do this project much later, then we would want to readjust that escalation value, or if they want to do it much earlier. One other note on the soft costs is based on this group and several of the groups we met with, we assumed that roughly 50% of the furnishings and equipment would be carried over from the old buildings and 50% would be new. So I've adjusted that on the soft cost side of it as well. And again, we can continue to refine that as we take inventory and get closer to a project.
Right, and that's a lot of things that actually came up in these meetings as well, as just as far as we as an owner, what we have to do as far as moving forward of just assessing the materials and what we have on site and what we're actually able to bring into the new building. So really for us, that just we have a lot of legwork to do as well, as far as just getting information and documentation to see what we can bring over that helps those costs to be reduced as well.
So yeah, before we go to questions, I want to call out Roger and his whole committee and Lance and Harvey for a lot of work done very quickly. So this was a tall task to get all of this done and wrapped up in such a short time frame. So really appreciate your efforts, and cutting the costs down doesn't hurt either. So thank you.
Amy, I want to share with everyone too. I really appreciate the approach that Roger took with the subcommittee, and that was to create Google Sheets where we each had an opportunity to really go line by line and ask our questions. And so Christine Grayson, for example, had a lot of really, great questions from just kind of looking at it and saying like, well, what is this, right? Like just the basic, just so the committee can kind of have that sense of understanding of the process that we try to employ, which was really going line by line and questioning things from that, well, what is this? Well, is there another material that would work here that would have the same durability, that would last longer? And in some cases, there were some options, and we were able to scale down, and in other instances, that may not be the case. So I appreciated that opportunity, and it was really quick. So I'm sure we could definitely, spend hours looking at it, but I do feel like a fair amount of work was done to get us where we are tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. The devil's always in the details. So thank you. I know, Christine, you were very poignant in your comments and your questions, and really appreciate that. So thank you. So with that, any questions for Roger or Lance on the process? I know we will, Shannon and I have a draft presentation that we're going to share with you later that we're looking to present to the board. So maybe at that point you'll have some additional questions, but any initial questions right now? I'm not seeing any.
See Lance's hand is up here.
Okay, go ahead.
One point we forgot to note, when we looked at the middle school, we went back to the drawing board on that a little bit and decided that we sought out a renovation only project and redesigned it to fit as much as possible in the existing building footprint so that we wouldn't have to do the addition on that. So it's really important to note much of the costs that scaled back on the middle school were based on a new concept that renovation only, fit as much as we can inside there. We still were able to get the same amount of classrooms. What we had to do is squeeze a few of the areas, including some of the common space, but we are still refining that as we speak. But I think that was a successful effort.
Yeah, Lance, I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. That's a really important point to mention. And when we were going through line by line and really kind of thinking of the totality of what we're asking residents to support and what we're trying to accomplish, we started thinking about, okay, we're moving fifth grade out of this building. What does that do for the building capacity? How can we work, how can we, it wasn't that we were trying to take anything away from AMS. We're certainly not, but is there a way to work with the existing footprint that would, be the most cost-effective way to kind of get at our objective here? And so I appreciate Lance sort of starting to redesign the space to be what we want at a cost that it certainly feels better to put forward.
I'm just looking to see if there's any hands up. I'm not seeing any right now. So what we can do is we can move into the next subcommittee. I have a feeling we may have to circle back on the building scope, but let's move forward with that first off. So I don't know if Brian or Adam, you want to start us off?
I'll start us off by saying I did exactly what I do in the office. I had an idea and I punted it to Adam to do the work, which I thought was a brilliant move on my behalf.
There you go.
Really, to tee Adam to tee you up, really what we tried to look at was, what are the costs of all the projects? What are the current rates relative to today? And what's the baseline impact to the tax line for us? And Adam's gone through and has created a very pretty little Google Docs chart that helps us really pick and choose when's the right time to make the investments. And the one thing I'll state is that we are at historically low periods in time in the marketplace where borrowing money is extremely cheap. And Adam has educated many of us on the muni bond space over the last 2 years. And what you'll see is the rates on muni bonds are significantly lower than what you would see on even your own personal mortgage. We're talking, I think Adam right now it's at 0.57. Is that what I saw? So we're talking really cheap cash. And when you start to look at the size of these notes and the duration of time for which we would be executing them, we're probably not at a better point in history, at least not recent history, to borrow money. It's the cheapest point in time to borrow money. And this is an area that I think we need to emphasize with the community, that at some point in time, these facilities are going to require, whether it's maintenance and repair or additions or demolition and rebuild. We're probably not going to be in a position in the next 20 or 30 years to have interest rates this low to capitalize on. So it's a unique opportunity. It's an unfortunate thing that we have to build new buildings. But right now, if you had to borrow money, this is the best time to do it. We need to take that into consideration, because if you look back and what these projects could have cost 5 years ago, you're talking tens of millions of dollars less. However, you'd be carrying a little bit more from a financing charge perspective. If you do these projects 5 or 10 years from now, they're going to cost tens of millions of dollars more. I think when Adam and I were looking at some of the numbers, you're talking about like the difference between like a $60-something million project to a $90-something million project. I mean, significant cash changes just by waiting. So it's a hard pill to swallow when you look at the size of the dollars. However, they're not going to get smaller in the future. So we've got to really help educate the community that we are at a point where an investment is required, and it's a unique period where this is probably a very good time for us to make that investment, because it's only going to get more expensive for the taxpayers in the future. And then we're starting to pull together, I'm starting to pull together some metrics around, how has new schools impacted property value, and looking at property valuation over the last decade and projecting what that property valuation may be. And I can tell you, Amherst is less than 3% property value appreciation over year over the last decade, where the surrounding communities who have made investments into schools like Hollis and Bow and Wyndham and Bedford, they're looking at a 4.5% to almost 5% property value increase year over year. So there's clearly a differential between those towns that have made investments into their school systems and its correlation to their property values. So all those factors need to be taken into consideration when the community thinks about voting for these types of articles. So with that, I'll stop and I'll let Adam show you the real numbers.
Thanks, Brian. That was a good tee up for Adam.
Yeah, thank you. So my goal is to kind of share visually how the process might work and how it might affect our expenses for capital projects. So I'll just share a couple of charts to demonstrate. First, a typical bond warrant article has a payback that looks like this, where if something was passed this coming March, next year there would be no tax impact because we haven't borrowed the funds yet. But then following that, the first year is the highest tax impact for a project because we're paying a principal payment that is the same each year, but we're paying interest on all the future years' bond payments, if that makes sense. And so the first year's amount is always the highest. And then the payments each year go down steadily until you get to the end of the term, and then it drops back to zero. And so the question is, how do we come up with a funding plan that provides a somewhat consistent tax impact to our voters and our taxpayers, but still gets these three different projects that we have accomplished over the next several years? And so as an example, without doing much work at all, you can see that if you had three projects and there was no work done to keep the tax impact level, that there would be huge spikes and drops based on when projects are funded and when they start and when their payments are done. And so the next thing I'll show is based on Brian's thought about bond rates, we researched historical bond interest rates. So in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Municipal Bond Bank sells bonds on behalf of municipalities and schools, typically for smaller projects, but for large projects as well. And because they sell those bonds directly and they're a public entity, they publish their historical rates where they've sold bonds. And so you can see this table going backwards from today shows what the interest rates were this year with the bonds that they sold, and the longer out into the future, the higher the interest rate. And so they were at 0.57, 57 basis points for a 5-year bond sale that they just completed in the last 6 months, which is by far the lowest going back to fiscal year 10. And so as Brian mentioned, our historic bond interest rates are extremely low. And so we tried to also forecast unscientifically what future bond rates might be and how much they might increase. And so we've included that in our calculations, which is nothing more than just a guess. There's no science involved in that at all. The next thing we did was I wanted to take into account all of the different variables. So for 3 projects, assuming we have 3 projects to look at in the future, Clark Wilkins, AMS, and Sauhegan, the first and most important variable is when it gets approved by voters. And so I built this model to be able to plug in different dates and look at what the impact of those different dates would be. So for example, the Clark Wilkins project, which is right now estimated at $66 million, if that was put off 10 years, we would expect that $66 million project to cost $98 million because of what we're using right now is a 4% construction inflation year over year. So we wanted to kind of have that ability to look into the future and apply that to our future costs. The next thing we did was, I'll get to the Capital Reserve Fund in a minute, but we looked at what interest rates could be based on future inflation of interest rates and then what the average would be for a potential project. And anything less than 2 200 bips is very rare and as again, as Brian mentioned, unheard of. Next, we include term and how long we can pay back debt. So for example, right now at 30 years, you can see that our total payments, our total debt service is $76 million for that $66 million project. And so the interest as a percent of the project is 25.9%. If we paid it back in 5 years, which we would never do because we couldn't afford the payments, it drops that interest as a percent of project way down. And so this we can use to kind of balance between the longest possible term of 30 years and something shorter, typically 20 or 25 for large municipal projects, and then see what our total investment might be. Now I'll say capital reserve fund. So there are two ways to provide a consistent tax impact. One is the total dollars approach. So for example, if we wanted to say we wanted to spend the same amount of money each year and cap that at some number, say $5 million in investment, and these numbers are somewhat arbitrary. You can see that this chart shows an attempt to level fund at $5 million a year the investment in capital facilities. And what it does in this chart, the blue, red, and yellow are the three projects, Clark Wilkins, AMS, and Sauhegan, and anything underneath that high water mark is set aside and invested in a capital reserve fund each year. That can be used as a down payment to future projects. So from the taxpayer perspective, the impact is the same year over year, and again, gives us cash to apply to future projects, thus saving us money on interest payments. So that's one way to provide a consistent tax impact. The difficulty with an even dollar amount investment is that valuation in town changes. It goes up year over year, meaning the value of all the property in Amherst or Mount Vernon, when you add it up, that's called the town's valuation, and that goes up every year, both by the cost of houses going up and also the amount of homes, businesses, et cetera, that are included in that calculation. And so we looked at valuation going back to fiscal year 12 and looked at the increase year over year, which goes from a low of negative 2.2% to a high of 7%. And it varies somewhere in between. So just for the sake of building a model, I made the ability for us to look at a tax impact cap of $3, and again, arbitrary number, but a $3 tax rate impact. The reality of that is that the amount of money available each year to invest to maintain a $3 tax rate impact goes up, because as valuation goes up, then the tax rate impact is relative at that point. And so looking at it from a tax rate basis allows for future investments to track with valuation. And so I picked a valuation factor of 50 basis points, which is pretty conservative. And as Brian mentioned, looking at other towns, when they invest in schools, their valuation typically increases and accelerates. So this chart right here shows where the $3 tax impact maintains a consistent impact over the next 35 or 40 years for these projects, where the blue are all of the three projects and the red would be the capital reserve fund investment that we would make, again, to provide a consistent impact and have cash on hand to move forward. So looking at that, our small subcommittee, when looking at the numbers, if we're able to stomach the expense and the cost on an annual basis, it's never going to be cheaper than now to borrow funds and to avoid the construction escalation. And so when sorting it out, looking at it a couple of different ways, I'll show you what the chart looks like. So if we do Clark Wilkins and approved it this coming March and waited 5 years to do AMS and to fiscal 27, you can see the chart down here doesn't really change. We still are able to stay under the $3 tax rate impact, but the amount of money we spent on both projects goes from 120 million to 127 million. So in other words, we've spent $7 million more by waiting without affecting the tax rate. And so for that reason, we're thinking it might make the most sense to take advantage of the low interest rates now and the construction costs now and do both Clark Wilkins and AMS this coming year and acknowledge that Sauhegan 2.0, we have to do the critical things that Victoria described, but put that project off for 10 or more years to do the major Sauhegan 2.0 project. So this model, I am not an actuary, but I've been doing bond stuff for a long time with schools. And so I'm pretty happy that we can play around and make estimates based on all sorts of different things. So Amy, that's probably more than you wanted me to talk about, but I got going and let it rip there. So
no, it's definitely not more. And as I've thanked everybody, I obviously want to thank Brian and Adam, and I was in on this committee as well, learning from both of them. And I just have to make the comment that it's pretty incredible that we have a superintendent who can put this stuff together for us. So thank you, Adam. It's amazing that we have that in-house ability to be able to do this work. So questions on all of that. I guess I want to get feedback from people on your thoughts on the staging of these projects. What Adam and Brian and I are proposing is looking at doing both the AMS and the Clark Wilkins projects together as one bond. So I definitely want to hear feedback from folks on that, and find out what your initial thoughts are. Victoria.
I'll jump in first. I think it's a great idea. I think we know that across our district, we have problems in both of those buildings that need to be addressed. And looking at it from a financially prudent way of spending, makes sense across the board. I want to make sure that, when we look at that Sauhegan date and we're looking at it being, 10 or more years in the future, from what was in Sauhegan 2.0 and from the conversations that we had with our director of facilities, we should be okay to be able to wait those 10 years for those projects as long as the priorities are taken care of ahead of time.
Yeah, so we're still looking at those projects that you mentioned and not waiting 10 years to do those, but looking at the larger scope to push that out a bit.
Exactly. Sounds great.
Okay. Yep. Jeannie, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's really important to get word out to the public about all the savings that exist when you try to do a project under these circumstances, and that delaying only costs more. And I think that argument really needs to be made strongly. I did have one question about, just because I've heard of this sort of anecdotally, the materials are costing, they're hard to come by these days and are costing a lot. I don't know if this has to do with COVID or exactly what's going on, but I wonder if that's a factor at all.
Yeah, I had asked Lance to address that as well, just in an email surrounding building material costs and labor shortage and where we are with that and reconciling that with interest rates moving forward and inflation. So yeah, so I'm going to punt that over to you, Lance.
Absolutely. So we have a very peculiar market, one we haven't seen before because we haven't been in a pandemic before. But what we are seeing is we're seeing select materials spike. Anybody who's doing decks on their home or anything like that knows that pressure treated lumber has gone extraordinarily high due to COVID, and that some of the factories that make the chemicals are not the supply chain is essentially being disrupted either at the factory or in the supply all the way to the US. That being said, we do expect that to rebound right back. Some other materials like the big things we use in schools, masonry and steel, haven't done that. And those are our big factors. It's more the woods and some of the smaller chemical materials. Looking at the overall construction market, there's a lot of reports out there. Most of them are consistently saying in the long run, it's going to even back out. And, Adam's using 4% per year. I think that's about the right number. Some are saying 5%, but in the long run, I think the market's going to even out. The dip we do see coming is just for a short-term dip this next year due to the unemployment rate. We see labor prices drop down for about 6 months to a year and then rebound back up. Obviously, any smaller projects we do next year, we'll see that benefit of that labor price. But I think in the long run, it's still going to stay true that the sooner you do a project, the less it's going to cost.
Thank you.
Tom?
So my question, and Adam, I apologize for making you go through this on a shorter version, but I don't think I quite understood the tax impact part of this. So I know that if you're going to do a $97 million worth of 2 projects over 25 years, the tax rate, we talked about it starting up high and then goes down. The other chart you showed was talking about $3. Is that to fund a certain amount of money every year? Was it 5 million at the $3? That's the part I don't think I quite understood. So I don't understand how it impacts taxes.
You want to
Yeah.
share?
I couldn't get it the process in my head the way that you were talking about it.
No problem. So, I set up the spreadsheet to look at establishing what the cap is one of 2 ways. And those 2 ways are either on a tax rate impact basis or on a total dollars invested basis. So when I switch over to annual expenditure, it picks a number. You can pick any number you want, and plug it in here, and it'll recalculate and say, all right, we want to spend $6 million a year on projects. And because that's way more than we need to do all 3 projects, this green section is temporarily overtaking it. And the green section is excess above what we have to spend on bond payments that we could put aside for capital reserves for future projects.
Okay.
So that each year there would be a $6 million investment. And I use this it could be 5 million, in which case you'll see that that's not quite enough. And that when the 3rd project comes down the pike, it would spike above the $5 million mark a year. And so we can use this to say, well, then maybe the Sauhegan 2.0 project needs to go out another 10 years. And you can see it moves that spike out into the future.
Okay.
So that's one way to look at it. The other way is to change this to tax rate impact. And right now it's set as a $3 tax rate impact. And the way tax rates are set are take total dollars that we need to spend each year, divide by all the valuation in town, and multiply by 1,000. So for example, if we were going to spend $5 million one year, we would divide it by our valuation of about $1.7 billion and multiply by 1,000 to get a tax rate impact of a couple dollars. And then that's applied, as you know, to people's homes. So looking at a tax rate impact as the way to set the high water mark allows for valuation to increase year over year, to mean our investment can increase year over year. So it means that each year our dollars in the tax rate impact method, the dollars we spend each year would go up, but they would go up in line with the town's valuation, whatever that percentage is each year. Right now, I'm estimating it at 50 basis points. And therefore, for a homeowner, for a taxpayer, their total dollars spent on capital projects would remain the same for them. So for an average homeowner, if it cost me $700 a year, I would pay $700 a year for the next 30 years when the tax rate impact is the method used. If we use the total dollar investment method, if I pay $700 the first year, it would actually go down for me each year because the amount of valuation that it's divided up amongst would increase each year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I'm still just trying to figure out the tax rate part. If we do a tax rate impact, I get the dollar amount, the overall dollar per year, but the tax rate impact, I don't know how you explain that, where you can, because normally you can say it's going to have this impact on tax rates. For an average house of $353, it's going to be an average of $1,000 extra a year. So I don't know. I guess I just don't get the tax rate impact. Is it $3 or is it that same dollar amount every year that's added onto it? Or is it just, you start off in year one, it's a $2.50 impact, and then the next year it might be $2.53 because the valuation goes up in the town accordingly or goes down accordingly?
Yeah, great question. So when using the total dollar amount method, say it's $5 million a year, then the tax impact of that would go down each year. Meaning if I'm a homeowner and and I have to spend $700 the first year, my investment's likely to go down the second year because there's more people in town paying taxes and the overall valuation has gone up in town. If we use the tax rate impact method, then the result of that is that each average homeowner will pay the same dollar amount every year into the future. So when you start with one method, you have the other result for homeowners, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right, I think I get it now.
Brian, help me out because I'm not doing a great job. I'm too lost in the weeds, I think. So Brian, help me out if you can.
When you go to a dollar basis, like a tax dollar basis, you're effectively carrying that value forward so that every year it's a repeatable valuation so that you can forecast out specifically what the cost impacts are going to be and do it in a very consistent manner. When you do it the alternative way, because the valuations are always fluctuating, what happens is the tax impact is going to be oscillating back and forth. So there's a lot more variability introduced to the taxpayer so that year one, it may be $700. Year two, it's $500. Year three, it's $900. It's going back and forth. So it's harder for people to forecast that impact going with that alternative method. So the recommendation is to try to have a consistent impact to taxpayers across the board. So there's no variation year over year. It's a consistent trend across. It's a smoothed out trend.
Okay.
That makes
It
sense.
just seems to me that makes for a bigger jump, and that jump doesn't go down is my only concern. Is that, and I know it.
That's correct.
So yeah, so it's just a bigger jump, and that bigger jump stays. That's my only. As long as I was understanding it that way, then I understand it. So thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. It wasn't going through my head the right way.
No, if you had the question, Tom, somebody else did too. So that's a good question.
I appreciated your question, Tom, because I think, how do we explain this to residents as we're out there talking about it? Like, we have to really deeply understand it and really be able to distill that. So I appreciate you asking the question.
The bottom line is you're going to spend the same amount of money. It's just how are you forecasting it out over that duration of time? So it's the same net value. It's just the payments. Are you having these variable payments? Or are you having a fixed payment? It's the best way I can explain it.
Before I go to other questions, Brian, can you just explain how the capital reserve fund plays into that? Because we're saying that we're going to use that for future projects, which you wouldn't necessarily really need a lot in future projects because you're building new schools and doing a renovation. So how do we reconcile that?
Sure. So in this model, if we have a consistent tax impact and you pick $3 as a tax rate impact, just again as an arbitrary number, when it comes time to do the Salhegan 2.0 project, say if you did it in FY35, 13 years from now, we would have almost $14 million that we could put aside and pay cash for that project and only have to borrow $27 million, even though the project would cost 41 at the time. So the capital reserve fund would have the impact of saving millions of dollars in interest rates and interest payments by applying that level tax impact every year. So taxpayers don't see a decrease in their taxes as the bond projects level off, but instead they save millions of dollars in interest rates down the road when we do the next project. We don't have to do that. You could take the capital reserve fund piece of it out, and then that just means that whenever we did the Salhegan 2.0 project, we would spend it, we'd have to borrow another $13.9 million and pay interest on that $13.9 million for the next 20 years after, or 20 or 30 years after that. So it would be something that every year on the ballot, there would be an amount that's determined to put into the capital reserve fund based on what the bond payments were for that upcoming year and the difference between those bond payments and whatever we said the high water mark was moving forward. So voters would have to make that choice every year. We couldn't commit to that happening every year, but if we start describing that now, we can explain how we can save significant dollars in interest rate payments.
So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for Salhegan. Can you explain that in relation to the Amherst School District? because they'll have to be two separate bonds, as we know.
Yeah, so in this model where we say that Clark Wilkins and AMS go together in fiscal year 22, there are two, there are multiple reasons why that creates some nice opportunities. One is doing both projects at the same time allows for, if one project goes over budget and the other's under budget, that we can even those out between the two projects. That's a really helpful and unique circumstance that doesn't often happen with school projects. The second is the capital reserve fund would be only for Sauhegan, meaning those warrant articles to save that money would only be on the Sauhegan side of the ledger, because we're not saving up for an Amherst project. We're already paying for the Amherst projects. We're saving up for a future Sauhegan 2.0 project, and we're setting that money aside just for there. So that's how that would work.
Okay, that makes sense. Does that help everybody?
Well,
Okay.
it does, except for when it comes to where that money goes, because if the Amherst taxpayers are putting money into this overall project, how can all of that money be taken towards the Sauhegan CRF when Amherst only pays X percentage of the Sauhegan projects? Would it just, whatever that percentage is, come out of that CRF and the rest would stay in the Amherst one?
Yeah, so there are two CRFs. There's one in Amherst, one in Sauhegan. And what I'm suggesting in this model is if we wanted to, as soon as fiscal year 22, we could take what we would pay to hit that tax rate impact and set it aside the first year in Amherst, which would be about $5 million. And that way we don't have to borrow, $60.8 million when it comes time to actually borrow money a year later. But then every capital reserve fund investment after that would go to the Sauhegan CRF and set aside specifically there.
Okay, so I hate to keep beating the horse, but just to be really clear, so I
No,
can
this
understand.
is really good, because we're going to have to be explaining this
Yeah.
over and
So
over
then-
again.
So then I'm, going to vote in March, and my ballot then would, under what we're looking at right now, I would be asked to support the bond. And then there would also be a warrant article for 5 million for the CRF. Is that what that looks like on paper when
That's
I
what I'm
go into the
suggesting.
ballot box on March?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm suggesting. It's possible it could all be in one warrant article, but it would likely be in two, like you described, all on the Amherst ballot. Correct.
So, yeah, the language there would definitely be a huge education piece. I feel like that could be really, really, okay.
Again, it doesn't have to be done, especially that first year. You don't have to do that. It's just that's literally $5 million that you're not going to borrow and pay interest on down the road. That's all. And it delays the tax rate being impacted for a year, right? So it would mean the tax rate would be impacted next fall, as opposed to the bond payments affecting it the year later.
Thank you.
Tom and then Roger.
Sorry.
Tom?
Oh, I'm sorry, they said John, my fault.
No.
So when this goes in the ballot, are we pitching then two projects? Are we pitching the AMS or I should say 3 projects? Are we pitching all 3 buildings this spring, or is it just the first 2? And then in 9 years, we'll pitch Sauhegan at that point, and then we'll just use that money. So if Sauhegan fails, we still have that money in a CRF for Sauhegan. Can that be transferred back to Amherst at any point, or once we put it in Sauhegan, that's locked into Sauhegan?
Two different districts.
Yeah, it's different legal
So we're
entity.
not pitching Sauhegan 2.0 now then.
Correct. But in my opinion, voters need to understand the whole picture. They need to understand this is the plan. And remember, in 10 years, we're going to be coming back. The Salem School District in New Hampshire is a great example of a town that communicated very well. They said starting about 20 years ago, all of our schools need work. We're going to do all the elementary schools, and then we're going to do the high school, and then eventually we're going to do the middle school. And you know what? Over 20 years, they've done exactly that. And they've passed, I don't know how many $100 million worth of bonds, but they laid out the whole plan and then executed and told everybody ahead of time, this is how we're going to do it. So we're not pitching Sauhegan 2.0 now, Tom, but we should be including that in the communication.
And I'm fine.
Can I just jump in
I
and
just don't like locking that money up into a Sauhegan CRF when A, there's no guarantee it's going to pass, And then B, we are back in the same situation we're in now, where we have nothing in the bank to take care of projects at Amherst, in the Amherst schools, where we have $22,000 on the ballot last March. How do we take care of, I mean, things break in new houses all the time. Things could easily break in a new school after 7 years. And if we have 30 grand in the bank, how do we fix that if all of our money's locked up in the Sauhegan CRF?
So I see a number of hands. Roger, did you want to jump in first? I saw you first.
Yeah, just real quickly, nice work, data committee, on that information provided. And I instantly lean to is Wilkins and middle school being built at the same time. I look at that as an opportunity for savings for us. I mean, we as a district, we're always trying to buy in bulk so that we can reduce our budget. Proposing 2 buildings, I mean, I look at that as buying in bulk. I fall back onto just talking about our OPM. If we're running 2 projects at the same time, I mean, that OPM should be able to manage both of them, with myself included. I guess what I'm looking at is running 2 at the same time offers so much more for savings for us, especially buying in bulk. Lance, do you want to just talk a little bit about that? Am I off base or on track?
I agree. The bidding market, as larger projects tend to drive cost per square foot down, because you have such a competitive bid market that you draw a bigger pool. If we work with a construction manager, they may recommend some trades bid all at once, while they may recommend other trades bid at different times. But with both projects, we can balance that and really look at, the market. Is the steel dropping, right now because it's based on energy costs? And work with the CM to say, well, we're bidding the steel for both projects now. We're actually going to bid the HVAC systems later. But I think there's a lot of management that can happen when you're managing these larger projects to really save taxpayer dollars.
Love it. We'll come under budget. Stephanie and then Ellen.
Amy, are you using the raise hand or just visualize?
I was just using visual. I can go raise hand. I'm sorry. I'll go to raise hand. Sorry about that. Oh, lots of hands up. Yep. All right. Stephanie, go ahead. Oh, you're still muted, Stephanie.
Bad signal because I'm
There
in
you
pit. I'm not. No, yeah, I'm not. I might have a bad signal. I'm at my dad's house. Sorry.
You're good.
So thank you for everyone who really went in line by line and looked at the cost of those things. I think that's a huge help in both of these projects. I like the idea that if we're going to talk about building a new school, that kids going to be left at Amherst Middle School, the 6th through 8th graders are going to make sure that we need to make sure they have space that is usable for them. So I think the idea of both projects at the same time is going to be important, to make sure that space is good for all the kids. And I'm a big fan of capital reserve funds. I think if people can expect and they know what's happening and why the money's being put aside, they feel better about knowing why the taxes are where they are. And it's not just, when you look at Sauhegan, we're not just impacting Amherst taxes, we're also going to be affecting Mount Vernon taxes. So it's going to be really important that we talk with the Mount Vernon folks as well and understand what their tax impacts are.
Absolutely. Thank you. Ellen.
So back to the conversation about breaking down when we're talking to community regarding, 2 projects at the same time, and then in 10 years, a 3rd project. It's when you simplify it to a 3-story house and you're renovating your 1st and 2nd floor at the same time. But while doing that, you're setting aside money to renovate the 3rd floor because you have to do it, but it's not a priority yet. So it's a simple concept that's getting complicated by percentages and numbers and graphs. And it's all about saving the money, like we all would try to do in our normal worlds, to set aside so we're not paying additional interest and another loan. So I just want to point, like, if we simplify it to the homeowner, let's talk about houses, right? 1st, 2nd, 3rd floor. I have some questions. So I just want to be crystal clear. We're thinking March 21, a warrant article of about 97,000, is that right, total, to get the middle school and Wilkins, which I guess at some point we have to stop calling it Clark Wilkins, but Wilkins renovated, which seems to me, it makes sense to me, because when we are thinking about bringing fifth graders down into a new school, and then we think about in terms of the voter, and the message will be so important to parents who have kids either entering Wilkins or entering the middle school. I guess my big question is, where will the children be when we're doing two buildings at the same time? Small detail,
Yeah.
but
They're gonna go to your house.
The Amherst
Yeah.
preschool is what I heard.
yeah, yurts, right? We'll put some more yurts up.
I can
Right,
speak to
Lance,
that. a
you're
bit. So both projects right now do have an assumed phasing plan about where we would put the kids. And what we assumed was that the projects would happen independently. With both projects happening together, we would merge the phasing plans and potentially save money there. One of the things that is very salient is if the middle school went first, we were more nervous about that because you have no swing space. And we were actually putting inside the dollars portable classrooms and temporary construction and things like gyms. If Clark Wilkins or the elementary school goes first, you actually can create swing space. We phase the way so we build a new building, we've got extra space. Now we don't knock down the old buildings yet or abandon them until we can finish the middle school. And then our last step is to bring down the old buildings and occupy our new construction. So
Got it.
again, doing them together is kind of a saving grace and more opportunities for us to phase the projects, ensure that every kid has a really good education throughout the construction period.
Got it. Okay,
to
clear.
hear.
And
To
I
address
think
your
another,
question, Ellen, on like the capital reserve fund, one of the key aspects about when you talk about like three phases, phase one, phase two, elementary, middle school, borrow money now, it's cheap, it's the right thing to do, it's the fiscally prudent
Yeah.
thing to do. Having the capital reserve fund for a 2.0 project, when borrowing money is going to be a lot more expensive,
right,
if we have to borrow less, it's going to be fiscally prudent for the taxpayer, so we're spending less money net net. So
yeah,
we're capital-
it's crystal clear to me. And you can, so I'm not confused about any of that. And I have to think, as somebody mentioned, that when we have two projects going hand in hand, I think it was Roger, there's got to be some savings in terms of the overseeing. So I just feel like it's a no-brainer. I mean, not a no-brainer, but you know what I mean. It's efficient, effective. It sounds like a great plan. I think it'll please a lot of our community members as well.
Great. Thanks, Ellen. Shannon?
Thanks. So I would just, when we're talking about the CRF and the town operates this way, right? We're constantly putting money into different reserve funds to, plan with our town planning. And if I'm wrong in that, somebody correct me. But I think that's what the town does, and it works well. And I think when we talk about capital reserve funds for our schools, I would suggest that we don't look at it as we're giving all our money to Souhegan. My understanding is that the Amherst School Board still has the discretion to continue putting a capital reserve fund on the ballot, even if we funded a new building. It could be in a lesser amount that we ask for that very reason, Tom. Even in a new home, things break. The school board would still have the discretion to put that on, out to residents each year to continue maintaining. And I think what will happen with Souhegan, if we don't do that, if we don't start saving for that now, the position that ASB is in right now, because the age of our buildings, Souhegan's going to be there as well, right? So, I mean, to me, that's the argument. This position that we're in right now with Amherst is the exact reason we need a CRF for Souhegan. Souhegan's a younger building, so it's not in the state of disrepair that we're at with elementary school and the middle school, which is also another reason to do both buildings at the same time, or all three of the buildings, the elementary school and the middle school. It's way overdue. We have kicked that can down the road, and it's here, right? The buck has to stop somewhere. So, I like this notion. It's obviously a big ticket, and As I stated at our last meeting, I had sticker shock, and it was really a great exercise to go through line by line. Also encouraging to hear that as we sequence these projects, we can, have, uncover even more cost savings as we go along. And I think that this group that we have here on JFAC, we are all certainly planning to shepherd that effort if we are, if we can move forward, because we all are concerned with our tax bills as well. But I just don't see how we can wait any longer on these buildings. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? I know we're covering a lot of ground tonight. Okay. Maybe now is a good time to go over our draft presentation, Shannon. If you want to share your screen.
Sure. It is still in a rough draft mode, so everyone to.
So just to give a little preface, this is in preparation for the SAU board meeting that is next week. So as you all know, it will be up to the boards on what they want to put on the ballot this year in terms of bond, warrant, etc. So our first stop is going to be at the SAU board meeting next Thursday. I had mentioned going to Sohegan on Monday, but that's probably not the best plan. Since this is an SAU committee, it probably makes most sense to just have this be our first stop, and then we can plan to attend the Amherst School Board meeting and Sohegan School Board meetings in November, and probably in December as well, to give them as much information as possible in order to make their decisions.
Yeah, I think, we've been working on this for a long time and we're in the weeds, and I think there's definitely going to be a lot of questions come up. So we definitely want to avail ourselves to the boards to answer any of those. So what we've done here, and we've had a lot of input from Lance and folks at the SAU helping us provide data and information. It is a very rough first draft that we are seeking feedback from this committee on as well. And then there are some things that we just didn't want to assume before we all had an opportunity to see the numbers after the construction cost committee worked, and then what the data committee has come up with. So just keep that in mind as you're looking. So our first slide here, I really like that we have all 3 of these little logos at the bottom. If you guys will remember when we first started last winter, and we were meeting at the Brick School, our student representative, Shannon Hargreaves, created this logo for us. So, this one in the middle really represents JFAC and all of our work as community members and board members and SAU employees and all of that. And then obviously we have the SAU logo and LaValle Brensinger. All right. So then basically, can you all see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Computer feels like it's moving a little slow. Okay, so just remind the SAU board again of our charge. This is all information we have presented before, so I'm going to fly through it a little quickly. Committee members, again, we have some things to do to make this look a little bit nicer. It's very plain right now. Timeline, so similar to what Victoria presented earlier. Capital needs assessment in 2007, 2.0 in 2018. First version of JFC formed in September 2018. That March, the first pass at A&E fees for Amherst was rejected, and kind of the list goes down. You're all familiar with that. Talk to the SAU board about our process since the vote. This slide you should all be pretty familiar with, and it looks a little off. I'll fix that, but this was presented at the December 2019 Facility Summit by Superintendent Steele, showing the conditions of the buildings. We have some photos just that kind of represent all of the schools. So these are the famous locker room photo, the temporary portables, which are now a, semi-permanent fixture at the elementary school, the triangle classrooms, a crowded lunchroom. And then the existing conditions, we've seen all this from La Valley. We can talk to it in detail to the SAU board. Significant issues at Clark Wilkins. So really, we're missing classrooms. We know that. We are operating 2 buildings, not very efficiently because of their ages and systems. So it's an additional cost. Significant needs at Clark Wilkins. You guys tell me to slow down if you want. I'm just gonna kind of blow through this. More photos that Lance has provided, just showing kind of some of the existing conditions. This, which my first thought was, wow, that's a really beautifully waxed floor. But I think what this picture actually is showing us are some accessibility issues that we have in the building at Clark. Lance, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Again, more issues at Clark. And now we move on to AMS. So at AMS, some of the big challenges, obviously, that we've talked about on this committee are, that the middle school was built probably during the worst period for public school construction in the country. And they thought these, is that true, Lance? I see you kind of snickering.
Before my time, so yes.
Yeah. So you can, yeah. But the triangle classrooms with the movable walls, while those may have been a great idea at the time, they are falling apart. They don't provide any acoustical separation. And when you think about the square footage of that classroom, you're actually not able to use a portion of it because of the shape. So that's become a real challenge and problem. We know we're overcrowded in that building. So again, more information on the significant needs. There's a picture of one of the rooms. Closets used for offices, and then we get to our class size targets. So these, again, we've seen these before. These are the class size targets as set by the Amherst, as adopted by the Amherst School Board. And you'll see here that for grades 1 and 2, we are currently at the 7th highest class size in the state, 12th in grades 3 and 4, and 5th through 8, we're 5th highest. Buildings are squeezed. And then Amy pulled together with the help of some folks at the SAU, our enrollment projections. So as you can see, we're not projecting anything to go down. Amy, feel free to jump in. I know I'm going quickly.
No, that's okay.
I feel like I'm speaking to a pretty well-versed audience, so.
Yeah.
And then we had shared already with the SAU committee, SAU board, the staff survey results, but we have not shared the community survey results. So we will remind them of the staff survey results and then share the results from the community survey, which have been summarized here. So the survey that we sent out to the community over the summer, the most pressing facilities needs ranked top 3 were to address the aging and inefficient facilities, the increasing class sizes and student-teacher ratios, and safety security. Rated very critical or critical, we're building safety and security. So I think that, having those addressed as a priority in 2.0 is on point with folks in the community. And for our Clark Wilkins and AMS, those issues of safety and security would be resolved with the plans that we have. Roger, do you have your hand up? Okay. And then we just highlighted a few of the free response questions, answers in the from the community. So, they really centered on themes of quality schools, property values, prudent spending, time for a solution, and no more Band-Aids. So there is a sense in the community that we really want you to spend wisely. What you ask of us, make sure you go line by line, be prudent, but also it's time. Band-Aids aren't going to work. And so I am appreciative of Lance for helping get us started on this. Do we need to improve our schools? Can we afford to? Can we afford not to? So we really think we have three options here. We can build new, we can renovate, refurbish, or we can kick the can. Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm noticing now as I pull this up, there's some things that need some adjustment here, but I didn't have these numbers until just recently. So the cost of Clark Wilkins, and Lance, if you want to kind of walk us through, I know you can kind of go in on the kick the can number a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so
That might be helpful.
the kick the can numbers that you see here, you had the on-site insight reports, which outlined all the different repairs that need to happen. The kick the can number is over the next 20 years, including all of those repairs, plus some of the items that we've done. It also includes actually the cost of portables, because you're really at a point where you're going to have to start purchasing more portables. So we included the monthly payments on portable construction to get us to where we need to be. So at this particular school, we included two 10 classroom portables.
I think what's striking here is that the renovate, refurbish, and the build anew, the price tags are quite close. So I think that's a compelling visual.
I agree. Yeah, and again, there's some wonky things here that we need to work on, but ignore that.
Ignore all the style.
Ignore all the stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You can see it bothering me.
It will be made pretty over the weekend.
Yep. So, just kind of laying out why we need to build a new Clark Wilkins. We have some of the highest class sizes in the state. Temporary portables being used as permanent classrooms, which are now approaching 2 decades in use. And, we've seen some fire safety issues in recent history as a result of that. Air quality concerns, accessibility issues. 5th grade is more appropriate in elementary school. Lining up our elementary curriculum across the U.S., across the SAU. Lack of adequate space has teachers on carts. Lack of available space for support services. So, the video tour that Brian and I led last spring showed closets that are now offices. So that's obviously a problem. The gym, cafeteria, auditorium, shared space, and lack of available space for services. What are the costs at AMS? Lance, I'm going to look to you again on this number. I think your answer is going to be pretty similar, but maybe you can, I like your explanation for where you got the new middle school number, because that was new to me when this was sent over.
Yep, so the middle school, what we did is took your program, so the rooms that we need, and assumed new construction costs if we were to build a brand new school. We used average cost per square foot for this year's school construction in New Hampshire, and that arrived just at the $59 million. It is, that's for.
Just want to know, Lance, just make the point, because we had asked the question, why can you build a middle school for 59 and it's going to cost 66 for the elementary? So
This assumed we're building a middle school for only 3 grades. Currently, your middle school houses 4 grades. The elementary school, of course, is housing all the way from pre-K up through 5th grade. So significantly different size buildings. So if you're the 59 million would be a 3-grade middle school based on your current population and your population projections. The kick the can number, again, looked at the on-site insight reports. It included all the systems that we know over the next 20 years. We said there are some systems that Roger's going to stretch the life. Some cannot make it 20 years, no matter how magical Roger is. And we said, well, you're going to have to replace those as you go then. And you're also going to have to rent some portables here. You had less portables here, just knowing that kicking the can it's less of a growth issue here once the 5th grade comes out.
And again, I think the visual of the renovate, refurbish, and the kick the can, the similarity in cost is equally compelling.
So again, just reinforcing really, because we said all this earlier in the presentation, but reinforcing why we would recommend to renovate and refurbish AMS. And I won't read through all of the bullets. And the cost at Souhegan, which Victoria and her subcommittee shared with us this evening. And then we did put the footnote that further refinement of scope may reduce costs, which I think is an important note to keep in there as that committee and the board continues their work. And this is the Y partial renovate refurbish for Sauhegan. So the current science labs are in disrepair. This is pretty much all pulled from the presentation that Victoria just gave earlier tonight, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. This is a slide that's still being refined. So the cost of kicking the can. So Amy and I will work with Lance to really go through here and bullet this out. Stay there. And then this is all still waiting to be filled in because we were waiting for this meeting tonight and Adam's presentation. So this is pretty much kind of the end of it. And obviously the final, what's the tax impact of our plan? I'm going to stop my share. Does anyone, I know it was rough and I apologize for all the little style quirks. It really bothers me to put something out there like that, but there was so much that we were still waiting on that we didn't want to spend a lot of time circling the wagons there until we had input from you all. So thoughts, questions, are we heading in the right direction? What did we not share that we need to share?
Just thank you for all of the hours, minutes, days, nights. I mean, it's quite obvious, Shannon, your commitment and Amy's too, like to all the details while we just sit here and ask questions. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. I can assure you we were not alone. So thanks to all of you.
I think when you're doing the presentation, the slide where you talk about AMS and it's a new building cost for a 3-grade school, I'd be curious what other people think, I guess, about including a cost of a 4-grade school the way that we have it, rather than a 3-grade school. I think the number, for those people who are going to look at the PowerPoint and not listen to the narrative, I would worry that that's going to get lost in translation.
Good point.
So Victoria, you're saying to note that for them, is that right?
I just think it needs to be noted on a PowerPoint versus some audio. Yeah.
Yeah, have it in print. Yep.
Yeah,
That's good.
definitely. Jeannie, did you have a question or comment?
Well, I really had a comment. I thought it was a better than great first draft. I really liked it. The one suggestion I have, and I guess it depends on the audience that you're presenting this to, I would think that if this is just for the SAU board and other boards, then this is not so important. But if it gets translated into a communication piece to the public, I just found, at least in the past, because a lot of where we started was based on the fact that we're overcrowded. And that really isn't evident in the pictures. And I know it sort of requires pictures of students all jammed together in a classroom sort of thing. And
Which
I
they
don't know.
right now. So that's hard.
Right. But I don't know how you get those pictures because we're really not doing that right now. But if you can somehow get some older pictures of that, it would be wonderful, because I just think that's a real powerful visual for people to see that we really are overcrowded.
Great. No, I agree.
Thank you. I saw Stephanie and then Tom. Oh, no, Stephanie, that was from earlier. I see a little hand next to your picture. There. Tom, go ahead.
So I guess 2 points. Number one, you can't show the kids being crowded in the classrooms. But I think that what you can do, Shannon, is you can include the, I just drew a blank, the spreadsheet page as a PDF that has the classroom enrollment projections for next year and what it looks like with teachers and classrooms. And you can show the charts that have all the red on it that indicate this class is at 25 when we want it to be between 20 and 24. It's one we see constantly in the budget sheets and in the presentations. That may be a good placeholder. It doesn't show you the pictures of the kids being crowded, but it certainly illustrates the sheer statistics of it. And the other thing I think would be helpful maybe is And obviously, I understand you didn't go through the whole presentation tonight, but I think maybe just reviewing briefly what kick the can down the road means in terms of projects. It says 23 million for Clark Wilkins, but what does that entail? And just, you don't have to go into every detail, but the Cliff Notes version, it would be helpful, I think.
So maybe Lance, you can help us out with that.
And then Tom, I appreciate the tip on the spreadsheet with red numbers. It sounds like you're referring to something specific, and I don't know if I've seen that. So if you have it, or whoever has that, if they could send that to us, that would be really helpful.
Working on it right now.
Awesome.
Thank you. What else? But my hope really with this, and so for the PR group, Christine has done a lot of work with Tim behind the scenes to kind of start auditing our draft website that's ready to go. And the PR committee has met, and we've gone through, like, what do we need? What are we missing? What doesn't make sense? But really, I think most of it's going to come from this presentation when this is complete, right? Because what we present to the board should be exactly what we need to share with the community, I think. So it would be good to hear any of that now. Jeannie, I thought your feedback was good on the pictures, because I think those are needed for the website as well. Brian?
You know what?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, okay, sorry. So and this might be getting, I don't know, in the weeds too much, but Adam, maybe because we're talking about tax impact, and when we talk about Souhegan, do we need to address anything regarding Mount Vernon? Because the split, the 80-20 split, and their valuations and stuff are different. So we probably, and I don't know if Shannon is aware of that necessarily, because she's not part of the Souhegan board, so she may not understand all of that complication, but is that something we need to address during that presentation when you do tax impact?
Yeah, that's a good point, Stephanie. I think we ought to, just show the tax rate impact for both towns. I did the kind of the quick and dirty method of just Amherst, but you're right, we should include and do a separate chart for Mount Vernon. The arc will be the same. The look of the chart will be the same. The only thing that will change will be the left-hand side that shows the scale, or the axis. But yeah, you're right.
Thank you.
Ryan.
It might be wise to get a small focus group of residents, particularly ones that may not be supportive of this, and run them through that deck to get their insights. Because I think what happens is you get a group of us that are very like-minded and motivated to do this, and we've got blind spots, and there's stuff that just resonates and jumps out to you or I, but to a resident, they may say, what the hell is this? Or I don't even understand that, or I don't care about the third thing. I just think it might be wise if we could get a collection of friends who don't like us, and just get their thoughts and opinions, and figure out like what are their concerns, and validate them, and hear them, and then try to address them as best we can. I think having that diversity in thinking would really round out what we're trying to present and package up for the residents.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I know that in the PR subcommittee, that was certainly something we talked about over the summer, was holding those focus groups. I think the reason that hasn't happened yet is because we, as a full JFAC committee, this is the night that we should be reaching that final, I think, recommendation phase. So, but you're right, that's definitely something we cannot neglect to do, or forget that we have that on our list.
It even could influence our final decision or our final recommendation, right? I mean, things you may get as feedback from other residents may have us ask other questions we hadn't thought of before, because they have a different perspective than we do.
Mm-hmm.
So perfect segue, Shannon. Unless there's other comments on the presentation, go ahead, Pim.
Thank you. I did raise my hand electronically, but apparently.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm trying to look at faces and not look at the.
This time, Amy.
There it
this
is.
Time.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, so I have a few comments to take a couple of steps back, just quickly. One is the presentation that that Adam had on the tax impact, I think is exactly where we need to go and what we need to communicate, flattening the tax impact so it is consistent over time, I think is critical. Secondly is, as was just brought up, to include a Mount Vernon tax impact, obviously would be good. As a Mount Vernon resident, I want to know what that's going to look like. And then lastly, so I'm a huge fan of consistency. And if we are presenting multiple reports, AKA the 2.0 for Sauhegan, as well as the one that Shannon did on the Amherst school systems, if there's a way, and I don't know if how quickly it can be done, and might not be ready for the next week, but to get consistent reporting formatting. So the thing, it looks like it's coming from one organization versus multiple organizations. I know there are multiple committees, subcommittees, but let's, from a professional perspective, keep it looking so it's, we're sending whatever the message is, and there are similar messages, obviously, but to make them look similar. So people aren't looking at, a timeline in one project, in one presentation, and looking at a timeline, different presentation, and they're trying to, figure out what they are, when one speaks better, or I don't know, just, again, it's my opinion. So take it or
I
leave
fully
it.
support and agree with it. It's right on point.
I agree too. I don't think my initial thought was not moving forward that we were going to have two separate pieces. They would be together.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. That's all I
Yeah.
want to comment. Thanks.
We know what we're doing this weekend. Okay, so before we go any farther, I just want to make sure that we are all in agreement in bringing this forward to the SCU board next week. I think this is our chance to formally decide that this is our recommendation to bring forth to SCU board and then to the individual boards. So are we feeling comfortable with, we can do a vote, we can do a straw poll. I'd like this to be as official as possible, just because this is really the culmination of our work bringing it forward. We're not saying that, we acknowledge that we're not making this decision on what gets put on the ballot. And I think that's a really important distinction. And there may be some additional refinement that happens after the fact, but at this point, this is the recommendation that we are bringing forward to the SAU board in terms of how we're staging these projects. So any other comments, Shannon? Did you want to follow that up?
No, I think before we can do anything on October 29th, we need to have consensus amongst this group. So I think it's time. Yeah.
Could I just ask, Amy, I know you're talking about presenting a overall plan for all three schools. And we talked about doing the two Amherst school district schools at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Did we agree on how far out it would be before we address Sauhegan? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, where's Adam? Are you there?
From a finance perspective, when we ran the numbers, Jeannie, we were looking somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 years out. That was the target right now as it relates to impacting the tax basis. And based upon the feedback we heard from Victoria today, that appears to align with what they determined to be the viable longevity of what's in place today, with some smaller projects to be addressed sooner that would be absorbed by existing capital reserve funds.
Right.
Yeah,
the only thing I recall about in talking with Roger about the lifespan of the current HVAC system was that he could feel pretty confident about another 5 years, but I don't know, Roger, maybe you could address this, whether
Right.
whether we can wait 10 years. That's the only caveat I have right now.
So we were talking about the short-term upgrades and the repairs that we're doing, feeling confident that the unit ventilators would last us another 5 years, certainly. But we need to make sure that we're accounting for each year, just as I talked about before, is just including maintenance costs in the operating budget. Just as far as we know that we're going to have breakdowns and we're just going to have to account for them. Unit ventilators, there are common parts at this time. Eventually, 10 years, we may be adapting to other parts, but the units will definitely run, but there's going to just be maintenance costs that come along with them throughout the years to come as well. But I will say that's with anything, realize even a new building that we go into instantly has maintenance costs that are going to be active right when that building opens. So just even new buildings have maintenance costs.
And I'll just add that I think we say 5 to 10 years because the thing that will impact us is if we want to maintain an even tax rate impact, the thing that will make the biggest difference is how quickly valuation grows. And I think it's reasonable to assume that if we build a new elementary school and fix our middle school, that property values will increase more quickly than we anticipate. And that will result in more quickly being able to afford a third project. And so I think we can say a range and say it's 10 years, but it might be as soon as 5 based on how quickly valuation in town increases.
Okay, thanks.
And it is important to note that those other projects that were identified by Sohegan 2.0 subcommittee, including the science labs and the entrance, and the third one is escaping me. Oh, the lockers. How can I forget? That we are recommending that those be addressed earlier.
Right.
So Amy, can I ask that question then?
Yeah.
So because the SAU meeting is after the Sohegan meeting next week, are we
Yeah.
able to discuss these items and maybe bring up this discussion at our Sohegan meeting so we're not waiting until end of November to get around to this?
Yeah, so that will be up to Pim if he wants to, do have a preview to start discussing. When is our board meeting in November? Is it the end of the month?
I need to
It
look
is.
at it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's late, yeah.
Yeah, it
It's-
is. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I know I've gone back and forth on this because I like the idea of presenting it all to the SAU, but I understand your point. If our board meeting is later in November.
And then we're late in December and it's just going to be in a bad place, I think, for us to come to decisions
Yeah.
if we're not upfront.
So
And we're having a budget discussion Monday anyway. That's my thought is can
we are.
throw it in there?
We are. Yeah.
Tim, can we throw it in there?
Okay. All right. I think that's fine. I think, Victoria's presentation is ready. And I think that, knowing, we'll preface it with that the full presentation is happening on that Thursday and all board members will be there, but we wanted to get an early start because the Sohegan board meeting is later. So I'm fine with that. Okay, great. Okay. All right, are we ready to take a vote? This is exciting. Okay, let's see. I guess I would ask for a motion. Maybe Shannon, do you want to craft it? Oh, you're on mute.
Yep, thanks. So take a motion to finalize the recommendation from the Joint Facilities Advisory Committee to
To be presented to the SAU.
presented to the SAU 39 board in support of a new elementary school project at 66 million. I don't have the exact number in front of me, and an renovation refurbish at the middle school, currently around 31 million, and the priority projects at South Heat. Can I make this all in one motion? I feel like
Yeah, you don't even have to put in the dollar amount.
Okay. Okay, super. And the priorities as determined by the Sauhegan 2.0 subcommittee at Sauhegan High School.
There you go. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ellen, thank you. Any discussion? Go ahead, Pim.
The only thing that I'm want to make sure that we're okay with, as Stephanie mentioned and Amy as well, and I've been going back and forth also about presenting some information at Monday's meeting. Victoria, would you be available to give a, kind of a quick overview of the 2.0 presentation at our meeting? Just so we can at least get it out there. Because, as Stephanie mentioned, to wait until end of November is going to be a long time from now. So I'd like to at least get that out, but you're the one who seems to be most well versed in that area to be able to do that. Would you be okay with that?
Yep, I am available. I am not the person to speak to the financing of this. So we are going to put Adam and Brian to talk about that.
Pim, I'm wondering if during my superintendent's report Monday, I can give a 5 to 10 minute overview of where we stand and draw the Sauhegan board's attention to it. Mention how we're going to present it on Thursday at the SAU board meeting, but start the conversation with the Sauhegan board, because I think Stephanie's right. If we wait till the end of November for them to first hear about it, that's too late. So maybe I can do it as part of my superintendent's report in like a 5 to 10 minute time frame, as opposed, because anything more formal will be an hour-long discussion.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. Also, just to ensure that we hit on, not necessarily delve deeply into, but hit on that there could be budget impacts, especially if we want to start saving towards our unreserved fund balance for this fiscal year. So we can start utilizing it for the summer. So anyway, okay, I think that'd be sufficient. And Stephanie, quick question to you. Does that sound reasonable? And Amy, for that matter as well, based on thoughts?
Yeah, I think it definitely needs to get there and be put on their plate. Because we know we're getting a budget presentation, we're going to start diving into the departments. And knowing that if we come back at the end of November with the full discussion of this last piece from the JFAC committee and present to have that discussion, I think at least it's on people's radar and they know what's coming. So when we're talking budget, they're keeping it in the back of their mind.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, that sounds good. Victoria, you're off the hook.
Right, great point. Okay, any other discussion before we vote? Okay, so yeah, I guess I can see everybody if we want to do a thumbs up for all those in favor. All opposed? Any abstentions? All right, I'm happy to report it passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Huge amount of work for all members and greatly appreciated. And this is a very exciting step forward. So the next board meeting, as we've been discussing, besides the Sauhegan board meeting, is next Thursday. So Adam will be making sure that you all get an invite to that meeting. So it would be great if you could all attend. It's at 6 o'clock on Thursday, October 29th. And then we'll also get out the schedule for the individual board meetings. And it would be great for folks to plan on attending those as well in November and potentially in December. So unless there's.
Could I just ask
Yeah,
Amy,
sure.
if, because I just struggle so much with getting on these Zoom meetings sometimes. Would it be possible for the SAU to at least send us a reminder, say the day before with the link so that we can, you know, have easy access and have
Have it
reminders.
fresh in your inbox. I can ask Adam to see if Abby can do that for us. I'm sure that's
That would be
possible.
great. I mean, if I'm the only one who requires that, then it's not necessary, but I just think it's helpful to everybody to
No, I know
have
it's
a
challenging.
reminder.
I usually flag those emails, and that helps me find it, but I know it's a challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah, all right. Thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon and have a great night. Okay, bye-bye.